Test, test. Please switch your mobile phone on silent mode, yeah? I would like to remind everybody again, okay, please sit properly when Tuan Ku is on the stage. Do not slouch. And before you ask your question during the Q&A session, please place both of your palms together and raise them to your forehead as a mark of respect. Tuan Ku is here already. We will start anytime. Please switch off your mobile phone, please. Or put it on silent mode, yeah? Mengumumkan keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan diiringi dif-dif kehormat para hadirin di pohon berdiri. Para hadirin dipersilakan duduk. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat sejahtera. Menghadap Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan, Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah Ibni Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah Al-Maghfullah. Ampun tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah batik mohon diampun. Patik bagi pihak Universiti Malaya menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih di atas limpah perkenan duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku bercemar duli berangkat ke majlis Special Lecture Series 2023 Lesson Learned from COVID-19 pada pagi ini. Sesungguhnya, keberangkatan duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku menyerikan lagi majlis ini dan amat bermakna buat patik sekalian. Semoga Allah Subhanahu Taala sentiasa memberikan kekuatan dan kesejahteraan kepada duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk terus memayungi universiti tercinta ini. Menjunjung kasih Tuanku. Mengejar awan di gunung sana, berarak di celah pepohon buluh. Bismillah dan salam pembuka bicara, sembah menyusun jari 10. Ampun Tuanku, bagi meneruskan majlis, patik dengan penuh hormat dan takzimnya memohon perkenan duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patik turut mengalu-alukan tetamu-tetamu yang lain serta mengacarakan majlis ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Pro-Chancellors of University Malaya yang amat berbahagia Tuh Puan Datuk Seri Hajah Dr. Aisyah Ong, yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Diraja Ramlingah Talib, and Chairman, Board of Directors, University Malaya, yang berbahagia Tan Sri Zarina Anwar, Vice Chancellor, University Malaya, yang berbahagia Profesor Senior Dr. Muhammad Hamdi Abdul Syukur, Khalifa Head of Vaccine Immunology, Oxford Vaccine Group, University of Oxford, the Honourable Professor TESS LAMBE, OBE, Dean, Faculty of Medicine, University Malaya, yang berusaha Professor Dr. April Camilla Ruslani, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Special Lecture Series 2023 entitled Lesson Learned from COVID-19. Thank you all for joining us on this very special morning. Ampun Tuanku. To begin the ceremony this auspicious morning, we are pleased to invite Yang Berusaha Professor Dr. April Camilla Ruslani, Dean, Faculty of Medicine, University Malaya, to deliver her welcome address, as well as the introduction of the speaker. Please, Prof.
Menghadap Duli Yang Maha Mulia, Paduka Sri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan, Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, Ibni Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfurlah, Chancellor Universiti Malaya. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik dengan penuh hormat dan takzimnya, merafak sembah di atas limpah perkenan duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku, bercemar duli berangkat ke majlis Special Lecture Series 2023, Lessons Learned from COVID-19 pada pagi ini. Sesungguhnya, keberangkatan duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku amat bermakna buat patik sekalian. Ampun Tuanku. Patik merafak sembah dan memohon limpah perkenan duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patik turut mengalu-alukan dif-dif kenamaan yang lain serta meneruskan sembah ucapan patik dalam bahasa Inggeris. Pro-Chancellors of University Malaya yang amat berbahagia Tuan Puan Datuk Seri Hajah Dr. Aisyah Ong and yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Diraja Ramlingah Talib, Chairman, Board of Directors, University Malaya, yang berbahagia Tan Sri Zarina Anwar, Vice Chancellor, University Malaya, yang berbahagia Professor Datuk Engineer Dr. Muhammad Hamdi Abdul Syukur, Khalifa Head of Vaccine Immunology, Oxford Vaccine Group, University of Oxford, the Honourable Professor TESS LAMBE, OBE, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's special lecture by Professor Dr. TESS LAMBE, titled Lessons Learned from COVID-19. Professor LAMBE is the Clever Head of Vaccine Immunology and a Professor of Vaccinology and Immunology at the University of Oxford. Her raison d'etre is to stop epidemics before they become pandemics through her research team's work on vaccines. That determination was never more important than when the world was challenged by the COVID-19 pandemic. The race to find a vaccine was no longer a matter of research hubris nor industrial commercial success, but more of a fight to save humankind. Professor LAMBE took on that challenge as one of the principal investigators for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine program, co-designing the resultant vaccine. The latter has been instrumental in the fight against COVID-19 and was estimated to have saved more than 6 million lives globally in 2021 alone. For her services to sciences and public health, Professor LAMBE was awarded the OBE during the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2021 and received the Presidential Distinguished Service Award for the Irish Abroad in 2022. Here in Malaysia, we were not spared from the pandemic, and we had to overcome many challenges in the beginning, particularly in resource-limited environments. It required a whole-of-country response, and I am proud to say that clinicians and researchers here at University Malaya's Faculty of Medicine and in the Tropical and Infectious Diseases Research and Education Center, as well as our teaching hospital, University Malaya Medical Center, were at the forefront of creating and delivering life-saving care to the nation. We had learned much from our combined experiences with the Nipah virus, as well as the SARS and MERS coronavirus outbreaks, and the expertise gained then has translated into national, regional, and international research and industrial collaborations to combat COVID, such as the ASEAN COSTI initiative, the World Health Organization Solidarity Trial, and the COVAX partnership. Nevertheless, as we emerge from the threat of COVID-19, those of us in healthcare-related professions are painfully aware that the next outbreak may be just around the corner. Vigilance must be constant to allow us to respond rapidly and mitigate both short and long-term consequences. Professor LAMBE has a similar mindset. She and her research group are currently developing and testing vaccines against a number of outbreak pathogens, including the Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus, the Ebola virus, the Marburg virus and disease and coronaviruses. Her group is particularly interested in delineating the protective immune response post-infection and using these findings to rationally design vaccination strategies to prevent disease. The establishment of long-lived immunity post-vaccination is critically important in protecting against infectious disease, and this is a key focus of her research. This attention to detail, combined with robust scientific inquiry, are key factors to her team's success. In late 2022, one of their vaccines was chosen by the World Health Organization to be included in a ring vaccination protocol against the Sudan Ebola virus outbreak in Uganda. This year, another of their vaccines was selected by the World Health Organization for inclusion in trials to combat Marburg virus disease. I am sure that we have much to learn from Prof. LAMBE's breadth and depth of experience as we seek to prevent or at least mitigate the next outbreak. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming Professor TESS LAMBE.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm especially grateful for seeing your beautiful country and hearing the stories that you've had during your struggles with COVID. I'm going to talk about the development of vaccines against COVID-19 and the lessons that I've learned over the last 2 or 3 years. And these have been hard lessons to learn, but hopefully we will be in a better place for when the next pandemic happens. So the Ebola outbreak that started in 2013 and ended in 2015, 2016 started in Western Africa. And it's thought to have claimed some 11,000 lives. And that's largely thought to be an underestimate of the number of people who passed away from this horrible infection. But after the Ebola outbreak, the WHO and a number of eminent government bodies came together and, in essence, generated a list of pathogens that they thought would cause the next pandemic or the next epidemic. And some of these you will be very, very familiar of. You'll have heard of Nipah, and likely you will also have heard of Ebola virus. Other viruses, such as Rift Valley fever or CCHF, you may not have heard of. Regardless, we at the University of Oxford and many other eminent professions sat up and started to make vaccines and therapeutics against these pathogens, hopefully to stop the next pandemic or epidemic when it came. But how do you make a vaccine? And this is hopefully a masterclass so that everybody can go home and make their own vaccine after this. First of all, you need to know what the virus is or what the pathogen is that is causing the infection. And once you know that, once you've identified the pathogen, you then look at that virus or bacteria and you try and figure out which part of that virus, if you had a strong immune response against, would you be protected. In many cases, when you identify your pathogen of interest, you're trying to identify these targets, that part of the virus that if you had a strong immune response, you'd be protected. And in most cases, that is a thing called the cell entry factor. And that's the part of the virus or the bacteria that allows it to get into your body and cause disease. And if you mount a strong enough immune response against this cell entry factor, if you make these things known as neutralizing antibodies, in essence, you will coat the virus, stop it getting in, keep you safe, keep you protected. So really, it's my job to train your immune response to make these types of neutralizing antibodies and other parts of immunity to stop the virus from making you poorly. So what we do is we take, in essence, the recipe for the cell entry factor, and we use our vaccine technologies, viral vectored vaccines. But viral vectored vaccines, which you will have heard of, worked very, very similarly to RNA vaccines. What happens is when you get vaccinated, when you get that shot in your arm, both RNA or viral vectors are carrying the recipe for the spike protein. So once that vaccine gets in your arm, your body starts to make a large amount of this small part of the coronavirus, the spike protein. Your body will recognize it as being unusual or alien, and it will mount an immune response. It will make these neutralizing antibodies and T cells. And in essence, that's all it takes to make a vaccine. There's a little bit more, but in essence, that is it. And that's the type of way that we approached making vaccines before the outbreak, during the outbreak, and since then. But I often get asked, well, why does it take you so long? What do you do for the rest of the time, for the next 5 or 10 years? So to answer that question, I thought I would take you through the development or the pipeline of why it takes us so long to get a vaccine or a therapeutic to market. So you start with your vaccine design, and depending on how complicated your pathogen is, it can take days to months to years to design the exact antigen that you want to go into your vaccine. After that, you start with preclinical studies. And these are small animals, in essence, you vaccinate or you immunize with. And what you're trying to demonstrate there is that your vaccine does induce the immune response and the right immune response. So you're seeing these neutralizing antibodies. And then you progress on to your phase 1 GMP. In English, that means making vaccine that's suitable to go into humans. And at this stage, you're probably putting about 1 million to 1.5 million in cost, and that's UK pounds. So you really want to make sure that the steps that have gone before are pristine. After that, you start your phase 1 clinical trials, and that's generally small, so you will generally vaccinate tens of individuals to see if your vaccine works. But by the time you get to your phase 3 GMP manufacture, you're sinking in multi-million pounds worth of investment. So you really want to make sure that all of these steps have been pristine, that you've got the best product, that you're basically progressing what you think will go on to licensure. So it's an iterative process. And sometimes you'll get to your phase 1 and you'll go back to the start. And that's why it takes 5 to 10 years. Also, I'm an academic, so it's quite difficult to raise the amount of money that you need at these stages. So it's not that we're slow or lazy, but this is why it takes 5 or 10 years to make these vaccines or therapeutics. And that's the type of development timeline that we were looking at when we started to make a vaccine against a different coronavirus. And this coronavirus, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which is caused by the MERS coronavirus, has a much higher case fatality rate than SARS-CoV-2. It kills up to 34%. Generally, those individuals have got morbidities or they are generally individuals that are sick, who do succumb to this disease. And they're generally individuals that work with camels, and that's where this virus is found. So we did what we do. We made our vaccine by looking at the virus, identifying the cell entry factor, and then using that recipe to make a platform vaccine, a candidate vaccine, the ChAdOx1 MERS vaccine. We're not very inventive with our names, I'm afraid. We immunized some small animals, and what you want to see in these animals is that you're inducing the right immune response, so these neutralizing antibodies that I've talked about, and also what you can do with some animals is you can replicate human disease. So in non-human primates, you can, in essence, vaccinate them and then challenge them with MERS and see if they're protected. And we were very, very lucky. That's what we saw. We saw that these animals were protected after one shot. And I say lucky, but that's unfair because we've put a lot of years of research into this. So it's not all down to luck. Once we had these positive readouts from our making the vaccine, designing it and testing it in animals, we started to make a batch that was suitable for humans. And we are genuinely quite lucky that we have this facility at the University of Oxford. It's literally a 7-minute walk from one of my offices. And within this facility, they follow GMP processes so they can make vaccine that can go into your arm. We started our vaccine program in 2018, and we enrolled 24 participants. And this is the normal type of program that you'll do with a phase 1. You start with a small number because you want to see if the vaccine is inducing the kind of reactogenicity or side effects you would expect. So you start small, you take it slowly. The safety of your volunteers is always first and foremost in your mind. And what we were able to show is that we induced both an antibody response and also a T-cell response. And T-cells are very important for mopping up those viruses that escape your neutralizing antibody, and they can lessen the severity of disease. So really you want to see both antibodies and T-cells being induced with your vaccine. And this was where we were when the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak started. And it started in late 2019. Sorry, for the last 3 years have become a blur, so I always forget what year it started. Late 2019, early 2020. And my brother at that stage was living in Shanghai. And I was always getting asked by my mother, whenever there was an avian flu outbreak in China, would it get my brother? Would he be safe? Would he be okay? So I followed every outbreak that was happening in China with a very avid interest, because this is what I do, but also because I'd be able to answer my mum on that late Sunday phone call. It still happens. I was also following a now somebody I consider a friend and is the head of the Pandemic Sciences Institute in Oxford, Peter Horby, who I didn't know very well at that stage. And Peter was following the outbreak that was ongoing in Wuhan. And my brother, although he wasn't near Wuhan, did have friends who were in Wuhan and a partner at that stage who had family in Wuhan. So there was enough of an interest there to get me and my colleague, Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, interested in this virus. We're also very, very lucky that we work with a fabulous set of researchers in the Rocky Mountain Labs in Montana. And these researchers work on, they're known as virus hunters. They go into the wild and try and track these viruses down. And they also establish models that you can use safely in the lab to study these viruses. So Vincent and Neeltje are both very good friends and colleagues who hunt these viruses. And we'd worked with them for years as well. And it's actually this kind of relationships that you build up with people in the scientific community that allow you to be in a position to move quickly when an outbreak happens. But when the outbreak happened, we looked at the normal development process and timeline, and we said, that's not fast enough. How can we go quicker? So the vaccine design, as you'll see in a couple of slides, was done in a much shorter period. Myself and a colleague did it over a weekend. We started our preclinical studies, and at the same time as doing the preclinical studies, so before we knew we had a vaccine that would induce an immune response, we were sinking money into making a vaccine that was suitable to go into humans. So that's the risk we took, and it's the only risk we took. It was a financial risk, and it wasn't my money. It was at that stage, it was the University of Oxford's money, but really without the resources of the UK government, Serum Institute of India, and AstraZeneca, we would not have been able to take that financial risk. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through this journey is that you need to plan for the future, and you need to plan many steps ahead. Plan A, B, C, D, E, and F. By the time you get to G, you may be there. I never thought that as an academic, we would have to charter a private jet on a Sunday to get vaccine out of Italy to Oxford to continue our trials. But that's the kind of thing we had to do. And we had to change our mindset and be far more pragmatic in our solutions, even if they were astronomically expensive. Academics are fabulous. I am an academic. We're really good at thinking. We're really good at pivoting. But you need pharma to deliver this, in my opinion. And you need to partner with pharma early. We do not have the manpower to get this all the way through to licensure. And I don't know that a university really should be investing in that type of endeavors. And you need to work at risk. Again, not at the safety of our volunteers, just a financial risk. Collaboration is key. Without the collaboration at that time with government regs and international bodies pulling all together, we and other manufacturers would not have got where we needed to be in getting a vaccine under 11 months. And I'll take you through some of the main points of that, because these are the key learnings that I've taken away and the team have taken away from our journey. So the information that I needed and everybody else needed who made a vaccine arrived late Friday night, early Saturday morning. I get in trouble when I say late Friday night. In fact, the investigative journalists then thought I had hacked or had got information prior to it being released. It was past midnight on a Friday. I was still up. I may have had a glass of wine in my hand. I still consider that a Friday night. But in truth, it was the Saturday morning that the information came in that I needed to make this vaccine. And myself and a colleague, Sarah Sebastian, actually spent Saturday afternoon on our computers designing the vaccine. We'd done it many times before. This was not something that would take us very long. So we were finished on Sunday. Unfortunately, my Sunday got waylaid because more data came in. I had to reanalyze, reassess. But by Monday, we knew how we would go. We knew what we needed to get this vaccine designed. So we ordered the reagents that we needed to make the vaccine. And in fact, we had a vaccine manufactured on the 17th of February. Not a vaccine that was suitable to go into humans, but a vaccine that was suitable to go into animals. And to say the team was small at that stage is an understatement. This was me in the hood making up the vaccines to start those animal studies. It's one of the last times I was allowed in the lab because apparently I'm too messy and my writing is illegible, and that is fair, to be honest. And we started our animal studies, and we started small. And 9 days after making the vaccine, we were able to demonstrate that our vaccine induced an immune response. So we were really happy. But they got bigger because we got a lot of questions about the vaccine. And so we reached out to our collaborators and our scientific friends, in particular Vincent and Neilsha, running some of those studies in America. And we looked to see whether our vaccine was inducing the right type of immune response, and if we could perhaps see if these animals, if they were vaccinated, if they would be protected. And that's what we saw. In the non-human model that Vincent and Neilsha had set up, and Emmy as well, we were able to demonstrate that one shot of our vaccine protected these animals from pneumonia. So we were really excited. And at this stage, while it had been an academic exercise and the team had been small up to this stage, there was over 300,000 cases. So the significance of what we were trying to do started to hit home. At the same time as these animal studies coming in, as I said, we were making our phase 1 GMP product. And our vaccine was ready for human use on the 22nd of April. And we had partnered with AZ by the end of April. And you're looking at us, at that stage, we had over 2 million cases worldwide. Our volunteers came forward. They were very lovely individuals. They even came in without a shirt so that we didn't have to roll them up to get jabbed. What was a little, I won't use the word disappointing because that doesn't do it justice. What was really hard and what continued to happen throughout this whole journey, and we're still wrangling with it today, was active misinformation around this vaccine and other vaccine. And this lovely volunteer woke up 3 or 4 days later to fake news that she died. And she had to get on the phone to her friends and family who were obviously really worried and say that she was alive. And one of the lessons that I've taken away is once that misinformation, once that targeted derogatory statements are made, it is impossible to get that genie back into the bottle. And we did our best, but it is really, really hard. We continue to try to do that. We then started, so Andy Pollard was the lead physician who works in the Department of Pediatrics, delivering this trial. And Andy is not someone to go slow. So while I was in the lab trying to work out the assays to get the right readouts to measure the immune response from humans, he started the phase 2-3 trials. So we started what was small, and that was 10,000 individuals within the UK in June. And at that stage, there was over 6 million cases, so it was really ramping up, this really horrible disease. But the UK was doing what it should have done. It was in a lockdown, and it was keeping people at home, and it was keeping them safe. But that meant we couldn't test the vaccine. We couldn't see if the vaccine was keeping people alive or keeping them safe. So we reached out to Ann Costa Clemens, Mayenga and George in Africa, and Shabir in South Africa. But really I need to highlight Ann. This woman is a powerhouse of vaccination. She vaccinated over 10,000 individuals in Brazil. And at that time, if you remember, Brazil was going through a really, really hard wave. It was a particularly horrible time. And what we were able to do with all of our friends and scientific community was demonstrate that this vaccine was effective, it was efficacious. I'm going to take a moment here to suggest that you don't do what everybody does, including me, which is compare the readouts from different vaccines. And the reason I will suggest that is vaccines, those trials are run at different times, different populations, so you're not comparing the same types of results. The other thing that vaccine manufacturers did was define disease in a different way. So we were looking for an impact against mild, moderate, and severe disease, And it's really hard to prevent an impact against mild disease. Other manufacturers were just looking for impact against moderate and severe. To my mind, that's the right thing. That's what you need to stop to keep people alive. But it means you can't compare results across all the different trials. So 2020, I thought I was busy at the beginning of the year designing the vaccine and then helping with the preclinical work and then coordinating that work globally. There was a lot of late night, early morning phone calls. But then we started the clinical trial, and it was in the middle of the year that things started to really, really ramp up. But by the end of the year, I definitely needed a break, as did the whole team. And there's no one person, no matter what you hear, could have delivered this. It was a global team working together in unison. And one of the reasons that it was so hard was the increased scrutiny we were under, the increased media interest, and also the logistics of trying to get every sample from every volunteer, from every site. We had 14 or 16 in the UK, 6 in Brazil, to the labs to get them analysed, to allow the readout of our efficacy and the subsequent MHRA conditional approval. At that stage, we were looking at 59 million infections. So this is a disease that really did have, as you all know, a global impact. I'm often asked, and I generally get quite emotional on this slide because I'm often asked, it's happened again, I'm often asked when did it hit home what you were doing was going to have an impact. And it was seeing the data out of the nursing homes and seeing that our vaccine, along with the other vaccines, were making a real impact and keeping our most elderly, our most frail alive. And looking at our vaccine and all the vaccines in the wild, for want of a better term, was demonstrating a real impact and showing that these vaccines were working. They were keeping our older adults alive. And that, to me, was the biggest impact we could have ever had. The other lesson I've learned, and this one I don't well up on because this one was a tough one to learn, was the importance of communication. I was a very geeky, nerdy scientist prior to the pandemic, still consider myself one of those as well. I get very excited when a student comes in with a lab result. But that's not enough. It's not enough to get excited about the science. You need to be able to communicate it. You need to be able to have conversations. You need to be able to answer questions. Because a vaccine will only save a life if it's in an arm. It won't save a life because of what I've done in a lab. And we did a lot. We were under a lot of media interest, and we did a lot of documentaries, Q&As, and I'm hoping that at the end of this session, I'll also be able to answer some of your questions as well. Another thing that I am absolutely, and this I think I can speak for the whole team, the Oxford and AstraZeneca team, the thing that we are very, very proud of is that we were supporting equitable access and global equitable access. AZ did a fabulous job in getting approvals and emergency authorizations in over 100 countries. More than 3 billion doses were released to supply. And importantly for me and the team, because we design vaccines of importance for LMICs, low and middle income countries, 2/3 of the doses went to low and lower middle income countries. And because of that, because of the prioritization of getting vaccines in arms where it would make an impact, where it would save lives, it is estimated that in 2020 alone, that this vaccine saved more lives than any other vaccine at over 6 million lives. The thing that I'm not so proud of, but can't claim credit for, is how poor we as a global community were at rolling out these vaccines to low and middle income countries. If you look at the rollout of these vaccines, the vast majority in the early days went to high income and upper middle income countries. In my opinion, that was wrong. It can't and should not happen again. And to stop that from happening again, we need to enable these countries. We need to have a good scientific base and manufacturing hubs, good clinical trial delivery, so that countries can do for themselves. My journey for the SARS-CoV-2, I would like to say ended there, but I continue to work on multiple doses, different vaccination regimes. But I've gotten busy doing vaccine programs against a number of other pathogens. I've worked on a vaccine program against Nipah with Sarah again. We're very good colleagues, obviously. I've mentioned her a number of times. Nipah, as you all know, is a highly pathogenic virus. It was first identified in this country in 1998, 1999. It infects pigs and humans. The majority of cases are seen in South or Southeast Asia. And the case fatality ranges between 40 to 75%, depending on the strain that you're infected with. And there's two different strains. The animal reservoir is the fruit bat. We have developed a candidate vaccine, and we've been able to demonstrate in animals that this vaccine is protective. And we're starting our phase 1 clinical trials soon. Hopefully sooner than the clinic will like to deliver. I push these trials through. I'm also working on Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. This is a tick-borne disease. So there are very few animals I say I dislike. Ticks and bats are among them because they seem to carry some of the deadliest diseases that I know of. It is a disease that has wide global reach because of where the tick reservoirs are seen. People can get infected by being bitten by an infected tick or by being exposed to the blood of animals that have been infected. Animals do not get sick from this disease, so you don't know when an animal has it. And the animals that typically carry it are goats, sheep, and cows. Again, we have a candidate vaccine, and one of the things I was working on this morning and on my trip is getting that vaccine into our phase 1 trials. And I'm pushing hard to have those started this year, this month, in fact. And then the last pathogen, so your dreams aren't filled with nightmares, that I will end on, is the Phylovirus. And Phyloviruses, as I've described, caused the biggest outbreak in Africa. The Ebola Phylovirus caused the biggest outbreak in Africa in 2013 to 2016. But that's not the only dangerous virus in this family. So filoviruses cause viral hemorrhagic fevers in humans with a case fatality rate ranging between 50 to 90%. Ebola virus disease, or Zaire Ebola virus, which is one of the family members that causes disease, has caused the majority of the outbreaks. But there are other related family members, such as Sudan Ebola virus and Marburg. And viral vectored vaccines were tested in the outbreak that happened in 2013 to 2016, and thankfully some of those vaccines were effective and have been licensed. Unfortunately, those vaccines are not effective against Sudan Ebola virus or Marburg. And those are the outbreaks that we've seen across the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And we have, again, platform vaccines. We've used our platform technology, ChAdOx1, to make candidate vaccines that have, as described, been shortlisted by the WHO. So as you can see, the pathogens that we work on in Oxford, and this is just some of them, are wide-ranging and have impact globally. But the biggest lesson that I've learned across my career, not just in the last 3 years, is that if you don't invest in the right people in the right places, you're not going to be able to deliver any of these types of endeavours, any of this science. And that you really need an established alignment of global collaborators all pushing and pulling in the same direction to have an impact. You need an open dialogue across government, regs, industry and academia to empower these programs. Funding is always a bone of contention. I never think there's enough. I do think that we need to look at the way that we are funding this work. We absolutely need rapid access funding, and in fact, some of the philanthropic donations that we got during the COVID pandemic really helped deliver. But I don't think we should rely on philanthropic endeavours. I think there is an ask there of government and international bodies to allow rapid access funds but more importantly, long-term investment that is sustainable, that is joined up. And I think in that way, we'll have an in-country investment that will build a strong science and medical research base that will hopefully generate impactful research and health outcomes. And for the geeky scientists in the audience, have some fun along the way and have some great results. So it just remains for me to thank everybody that has contributed to all of this work. I don't name people because there's too many. There was thousands of us working on this program and all the programs. And to recognize the funding that we have received. And I'm very hopeful that there will be lots of interesting questions from the audience. Thank you for your attention.
Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we go to the Q&A session, I would like to invite Professor Dr. April Camilla to be the moderator of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lamb, for that really wonderful and inspiring lecture. You have taken us on your journey in vaccine discovery, and I'm sure that the lessons that you have learned will be very useful for us in Malaysia as well. Now, I'm sure there are many questions from amongst the audience, and we have 2 roving mics circulating in the audience, so please put up your hand if you would like to ask Prof. Lamb a question. Please state your name and your area of expertise as well as organization before you ask your question. Thank you very much. Yes, so we have a lady in the back.
Hi, Prof. Lam. I'm Rafida from Department of Medical Microbiology. My question is on regulatory and approval processes. In light of the expedited approval of the COVID-19 vaccines, what changes or adaptation to regulatory pathways do you recommend to balance rapid deployment with safety and efficacy assessment in the future?
And it's a very good question. And I think regulators need to be almost the guard dogs of all these therapeutics and these vaccines. Their job is to keep us safe. What we found super helpful during the outbreak and during the pandemic was having an open dialogue with regulators, saying, we have this data coming, what else would you like to see? So having that conversation, that two-way conversation where they would say, no, we want to see this, or that's enough, look at this. They never say that's enough, is the type of dialogue that I would like to see continuing. I would have to admit that, and I'm sure you've seen this in your country as well, we've seen a burnout of staff. People are exhausted of the tasks that were asked of them and the things that they had to deliver. So at the moment within the UK, and I hope you don't see this here, but our regulators are almost taking longer because they need to train more staff up. But I hope that the lessons that we've learned result in an institutional knowledge that they get passed down. I've got a lot of lessons in my head, but I need to pass them down in written format so that it enables the next generation, and I'm hoping that happens with regulators as well. So open communication and open dialogue is my biggest take-home with regulators.
Before we go to the next question, I just wanted to comment that that's
Sure.
really something that we have seen very much, that it's this dialogue, this ongoing dialogue with an open heart and open mind that really finds us solutions, and yet somehow that's very difficult to have in some circumstances. Yes, so we'll go to the gentleman in the back.
Hi, Professor Lam. Thank you very much for the excellent sharing just now. My name is Farid. I'm from the Pharmacology Department. I'm working on developing therapeutics based on extracellular vesicles or exosomes, and vaccinology is definitely one of the directions that I'm interested in going, so I really appreciate the brief masterclass just now. So my question is a bit more technical, so it's a bit on the design of the vaccine itself. So what are your thoughts on, for example, developing multivalent vaccines? For example, having the vaccine targeting not just a cell entry factor, but then probably 1 or 2 more additional epitopes that could, help with the immune response. And what about the adjuvanticity? Like, how important is that in developing a vaccine that can hopefully give a long-lived immunity? Thank you.
Very good questions. And stay in EVs. They're an emerging technology, so don't get out of that. So the question that, in essence, you're asking, because we're seeing vaccine updates, is there a way to make a vaccine so we don't have to keep updating it? What are the targets that hopefully we could have a vaccine that you don't need to get updated annually, or depending on how rapidly you want to update them. So there are some targets that don't mutate as quickly within the virus, and you will know this. So internal antigens that your body doesn't put immune pressure on. And there are, the difficulty with those antigens, or those parts of the virus, is that they don't induce the neutralizing antibodies. They induce a T-cell response. I've worked for many years on making vaccines that target a T-cell response, because in essence that will dampen down how bad you feel and how poorly you will get. So I'm all for it. I think making vaccines, I think what we needed to do in the pandemic was get a vaccine that would keep people alive. Now we're in a luckier position where we can take our time, we can look at the virus on a whole, and we can pull out different parts and see if we can make a one-stop shop. I'm not convinced you're going to be able to do that, but I'd love to read about it.
Thank you very much for that answer. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Yes, Professor Jamal.
Thank you. Jamal from Medical Microbiology. So thank you for all your hard work and amazing things that you've achieved. So I just have a couple of questions. First of all, from a kind of non-economist sort of point of view, I thought what AstraZeneca did was quite amazing, you know, in terms of funding and allowing equitable access and lower prices and so on. Do you think from their experience in the pandemic as part of this partnership, which as far as I could tell was not really emulated by others, but I may be wrong, do you think their experiences, bearing in mind some of the challenges and you know, subsequent comparative studies between the vaccines and so on, do you think others would follow? Do you think AstraZeneca would do this again, and would other companies be encouraged to do the same in future?
Very good questions, and I'll start by saying I don't work for AZ, so any of my opinions are my own. I think AstraZeneca got tarred and got hit with some really negative press that they didn't deserve, in my opinion. I do sound like I work for AZ. They were doing this to help. They were doing this to make a vaccine that could go globally. Would I change what we did? No. Have I learned lots of lessons? Yes. I think sometimes price is important. People saw this vaccine as an inferior product because we priced it lower. People expect to pay more for a superior product. And we deliberately went into this to try and make a product that could get into the arms of people in LMICs. Would I change that? No. Would I be a lot more savvy going forward about some of the products that I'm developing, not in a pandemic? Yes.
So these are some really hard truths that we all have to face, and I think it speaks to the wider academic ecosystem that while we are in competition, but at the same time, competition, whether it's for financial returns or for academic recognition, really should not supersede the need to do good for the world.
To keep people alive.
Yeah, to
Agree.
keep people alive, absolutely. Any other questions? Yes, Prof. Chan?
Yokfan from Department of Medical Microbiology. My question is, we know that basically vaccine equity, so basically Asia as a whole or Malaysia, we only got the vaccine much later compared to, of course, Western countries and also the country that manufactured it and also, of course, made them. So moving forward, how do we actually learn from that, and how do we make sure that, you know, countries such as in the lower middle income countries and also those from where, you know, all these outbreak pathogens are, how do actually they can benefit from, you know, what we are trying to do. Like, for example, we have been make all kinds of efforts and so on, like 100 mission days for making a vaccine and so on. So I would like to know, you know, as a country who do not manufacture, like in Malaysia, what is the best we can get out of it? Thank you.
Good question. And you're asking me about CEPI and the UK and many countries' 100-day mission. So the 100-day mission is a statement to try and, my understanding of what the 100-day mission is, to try and have a vaccine ready to be deployed after a pathogen has been declared an outbreak or of significant interest. It's a big lift. I think making vaccines against a completely unknown pathogen is going to be really tough. There are ways to try and do that. So there are prototype vaccines that you can make towards related viruses and hopefully show that those types of vaccines work. But I think the bigger question you're asking me about is, how does Malaysia do for Malaysia? In my opinion, what was really wrong was that vaccines that were promised to certain countries did not get there. There wasn't this type of equitable access globally. CEPI and other investors are looking at trying to build vaccine manufacturing hubs in Africa and elsewhere. I'm all for that endeavour, for making these kind of vaccine manufacturing hubs. What I'm not, what I worry about is that if you don't have the scientific basis or the scientific base of people in the country to actually feed into these manufacturing hubs, will they be sustainable? Will they continue going forward? So there has to be an economic model as well around these manufacturing hubs. And I'm afraid I don't know the situation in Malaysia, but I'm hoping to speak to your colleagues here more about the research you do and learn from you.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Sharul.
Hello. Thank you for that lecture. I'm a consultant geriatrician here at Department of Medicine. Now, I too choked up at that slide you showed because we had quite a heartbreaking situation here. So my question, although the speed and the impact of the pandemic on older people with frailty justified the approach that they were vaccinated first, older people with comorbidities and frailty have largely been excluded from clinical trials, as you know, not just with vaccines, and with little published data on safety and efficacy in this very vulnerable group. How would you approach the inclusion of older people in vaccine clinical trials moving forwards?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So normally when you start your clinical trials, you start it in healthy 18 to 55-year-olds, and they're generally not individuals who will succumb to the disease you're trying to protect against. And also, I will start them in the UK, because that's where I'm based, and and these are diseases that will not generally have an impact. So Nipah and so forward will not have an impact in the UK. The reason we do that is to look and see if there's any adverse reactions, any side effects that are unexpected from this platform. I'm a strong proponent of then rapidly moving to the country of interest. And I have partners all over Africa. Not enough partners in Malaysia, and yes, that is an open invite, to work on these types of clinical delivery. Your question about older adults is very relevant, and it's also relevant when you think about pregnant women and children who are also very susceptible. I actually think when you're developing a vaccine and you're making these vaccines for the first time, I do agree with the first in humans to be in healthy adults, because you want to really make sure that those adverse events are because of the vaccine, not because of a comorbidity. But we didn't go quickly enough, in my opinion, into 70-year-olds, and that was not. There was there's not a criticism of the program, but we do need to look at these vulnerable cohorts more rapidly after you've got your phase 1 data. And certainly during the Ebola outbreak, when they were testing those vaccines, there was exclusion of susceptible cohorts of the population, but there's an ongoing debate now as to whether that's appropriate, whether we should include pregnant women and children. For me, I think you need to take it step by step, but in a pandemic, you need to also be pragmatic about saving lives.
There's always that push and pull, isn't
There
it,
is.
of keeping people safe, but also being inclusive so that the outcomes of research are actually generalizable. Do we have any more questions? Yes, please. The lady in the center first, and then to the side.
I'm a non-medical person, so but maybe the question is not a question to you, but you are in an environment. So this is more about the political and also, I guess it would be political environment to have a center like where you are. And we in Malaysia, because of the limited resources, and I think this is not just about Malaysia when you talk about resources, it is also about priority, So I would have guessed, the ecosystem to support fundamental research, basic research like you have in Oxford, would be the first precondition, you may say, in order for us to support our own country, our own society, and the rest of the world, So for a country like Malaysia, where do we start? I know that Jamal and his team, I know some of them, and many others, I think they would like to be part of this supporting mankind, to be part of that effort, But sometimes you need the politics to be right first in order, and for the politics to understand what is fundamental when you are governing, So would you say that it wouldn't have happened in a different political and social environment, or political and a different ecosystem like you have in England and around Oxford? And especially, this is Oxford. Thank you.
That's a tough question. I'll take a science question any day. So I'm going to break it down slightly. And there was a similar but very, very different question yesterday about what is the most important thing going forward. And for me, it's, and I said this yesterday, it's building a love of learning, a love of science, and building that young, and building it in all of your children going forward, because children, as I have learned, ask the most awkward questions and are the most inquisitive minds, and will think differently about how to approach solutions. So I would suggest build young and build up through your education system. And then the question around, could this have only happened in Oxford? No. It could have happened in many, many places, and in fact it did happen in many places. So I had colleagues in Australia who also developed a vaccine, went on to clinical trials, but their vaccine was ultimately not successful in licensure. So I don't think it's unique to Oxford. I think it is unique to having a collaborative mindset, inquisitive, and wanting to be solution-driven. There's a difference between, in my mind, between very basic fundamental science and then translational science. And the translational science of running clinical trials is something that you can do in very resource-poor or resource-limited conditions. And you can partner with people and you can enable that. And that has a huge impact in changing the mindset of both politicians and scientists and wanting to drive more work and more science. So I'm not sure if I answered all of it, and I won't take on the politics question.
But it's so true, isn't it, that the discovery is just the early part of actually getting something into the populace.
Most of it is hard work. 99% of that program was hard work.
And that's why we have an implementation science program, which is to try and teach people how to actually get something that you've discovered out there and being used. So before we go into the last question, perhaps can I just take the moderator's prerogative and say, what are your experiences with regards to vaccine hesitancy? Because that's the end game, isn't it, to try and get acceptance of your vaccines into the population at the end, the target audience's level.
Yes, so a vaccine will only save a life if it's in an arm. So I've got a different version of a similar talk where I start with a cartoon from Edward Jenner's time. Edward Jenner is frequently referred to as the grandfather of vaccination, which is a little misleading because there was many, many countries and continents doing it before Edward Jenner, so I'll preface that. But this cartoon serves a purpose. And Edward Jenner basically identified that milkmaids who were exposed to cows and cowpox were protected from smallpox. Smallpox was an absolutely devastating disease, thought to have killed some 60 million individuals. And he vaccinated, and these are the clinical trials that definitely wouldn't be allowed now. He started with an 8-year-old. Vaccinated these individuals with cow-derived material and then exposed them to smallpox, and they were protected. But the cartoon at that time suggests that if you get Edward Jenner's vaccine, you will turn into a cow. It's not dissimilar to some of the cartoons that I saw during the pandemic about if you get the monkey vaccine, what will happen to you. So vaccine, in my mind, there's a difference between vaccine hesitancy and vaccine reluctance and the anti-vax movement. The anti-vax movement is a coordinated attack. Members of our team received death threats. We were sent, these have only recently, and no, I'm not going to finish, they've tapered down. I was going to say they'd stopped for me, but I'll probably get one tomorrow, accusing me of killing children, of the most horrid things. And that feels and definitely has an impact on the staff and the morale. However, I was coming back from Oxford. Actually, I think that's a lie because I think it was London to Cambridge. Regardless, it was a really long taxi journey. And I was in a taxi for about an hour with an individual who was vaccine hesitant. And he was reluctant. And he and his girlfriend were reluctant because they were worried about if they ever wanted to have a child, that there would be fertility issues. And it was actually through an open dialogue and where he could ask me all the questions and he wasn't embarrassed and he wasn't ashamed. That he came out of the taxi far more confident in reaching an informed decision. Now, whether he got vaccinated or not, I don't know, but I certainly were able to assuage a lot of his concerns. So vaccine hesitancy, I will tackle head on. I have no problem answering questions. And if I don't know, I will say, I don't know. Anti-vax is different, and I would, I don't know how to address that, except for getting out, giving talks, answering questions, and hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, it's a real problem, and to me it appears that perhaps the core of it is lack of trust. Mm-hmm. And while open dialogue is crucial to winning, the reluctant over, if there isn't trust in the person who's delivering the message, then you might just be hitting a roadblock.
Absolutely, and one of the reasons that we did so many talks and we put ourselves out there is I don't work for pharma. I work for a university. I don't have a very privileged background. I'm not privately educated. I came from a relatively resource-poor environment in Ireland. So my mum left school at age 12, my dad. So this is not, anybody can do this. So I think I feel more of an onus on myself representing and talking because of that, because people worry that it's all big pharma, that they're all making a lot of profits. And I'm not saying some aren't making a lot of profits, but this is the face behind the Oxford AZ, or at least one of the many, many faces.
I think that's something that governments and the powers that be, I hope, will recognize, the risks that academics put themselves through sometimes in trying to do good for mankind. So we'll take your question.
Thank you very much, Professor Lam, for the excellent sharing session. My name is Wan Fen from Department of Medical Microbiology. So I'd like to ask two questions. So first one, that you have been working on MERS vaccine before the pandemic. So after the pandemic, you quickly switched from the MERS towards the SARS coronavirus 2 vaccine, but based on the same adenovirus vector backbone. So what are the differences or what are the similarity of these vaccines? And my second question is about the future of the vaccine. Since you are working on other viruses, like including Nipah, are you using the same approach, or are you looking forward for other approaches, including the mRNA vaccine? Thank you.
So both good questions. So and apologies, I've forgotten the first one already, jet lag has just hit. The first question was about MERS and do we continue to work on it, the backbone. Yes, it is using the same backbone, but what is different is, the spike protein, we use the spike protein for MERS in the same backbone. I think one of the questions that you may be asking is, can we continue to use this backbone for lots of different diseases? If you use this backbone, will you still see good results when you use it for different diseases? And what we've done is we've vaccinated individuals 3-4 times to see if we're still getting a good immune response against SARS-CoV-2 or different antigens to target different diseases. And certainly the data that we've seen to date is good. I'll profess that I do like Chadox-1. I've worked on it and with it for many, many years, but I don't really care about which vaccine you get to keep you alive. So do I work on RNA platforms? Yes, I do. And we'll continue to do that as well. So whatever will help me make a vaccine, I will use and keep you safe, and once it's not something that's going to knock you out.
Yes, Prof. Yvonne, question from you.
My name is Yvonne. Thank you very much, Prof. Lam, for your inspiring talk. I have a question and I have a request. The question is, I think you have listed down the virus candidates that you are studying. Could you share with us what's your rationale in picking these candidates? And perhaps in my case and in many of my colleagues' case, the interest in Nipah. We know that currently the pandemic, or perhaps there are certain outbreaks in South Asia, I think in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and that sort of brings me to my request. There are many of our colleagues who have institutional memory of what happened here, and there are lots of interests. And I think I'm reciprocating your invite in terms of partnership. I'm not directly involved, so no conflict of interest here, but we have lots of colleagues. And the good thing is that we are still in contact with the communities that were initially affected. We just celebrated the 20th anniversary, and that was during the pandemic, 2019. And I think there are lots of interests if you're working on that virus and the vaccine. So perhaps back to my first question.
Sure. So I don't prioritize the viruses. It's too hard a job for me. And yes, you're right. I've worked on programs against all of them except Zika, and I don't know why not Zika. So generally, what happens is the WHO publishes a list of pathogens that they're very worried about. They're updating the list, and it's due out in November this year. And that list was after the Ebola outbreak. So that is how we identify what we think might cause the next pandemic. I'm always worried about disease X, the unknown, where it's going to come from and what it is. If you had asked me before SARS-CoV-2 what was going to cause a pandemic, I would have said flu. I still think flu might cause a pandemic. very eager to meet your colleagues and interact with them. My colleague Sarah Gilbert is leading the programme. I work in the immunology. This is going to sound very macabre, but we'd love to bleed some people so that we can look at the protective immune response and compare it to our vaccine immune response. So yes, that definitely will reciprocate that invite. Thank you very much.
I'm sure we'll find people who'd be willing to submit to your vampiric.
It is a little macabre.
Yeah. Dr. Avifi, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tess. It's really wonderful that you've agreed to have this exchange, particularly for our local scientists here, and indeed the invitation to go to Oxford. So we certainly look forward to receiving you a lot. Now, just for the lay public here, and I consider myself one of them, being a non-scientist, if we look from the outside, looking into this medical academy, you would think that what the Oxford group has done is essentially developing a vaccine that normally takes about 5 years, traditionally, to do all that within under a year, but without using a new technique like the mRNA. So some of us will be left wondering, so what really is the innovation here? I mean, what's the magic here? And this is the bit that really people ought to know more about, I think. And if you're asked the question, is it the science, or is it cutting down on the bureaucracy? Is it the processes? But how for a traditionally 5-year, development process could have all been done just within a year? Or is it just the fear of death? Well, thank you. That's all.
I think the fear of death does instill a certain urgency. Yes, definitely. Yeah. You're right. The platform technology, the viral vectors, and in fact RNAs had been around for decades before this. If you're to ask me what is the magic ingredient that allowed this to happen, it's people. It is people willing to go the extra mile. It's people willing to have these dialogues. It's people that's willing to volunteer, willing to work in the trials. It's a willingness to try to pull down those walls that we've built up around us, the bureaucracy, etc., and to work together to get things done. So I'll always invest in people first.
Excellent question. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Chong. I'm from Department of Pharmacology. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. So my lab works on snake bite and venoming. So snake bite is quite a neglected tropical disease. So it's not spotlighted as much as cancer or cardiovascular disease or diabetes. So one of the problems that we have in the lab is that we have trouble getting attention from the pharmaceuticals. So do you have any advice of how we can spotlight ourselves, because we also work on antivenom efficacy as well? But it's hard to highlight this disease when it's so neglected.
Yes, no, I agree. And in actuality, prior to SARS-CoV-2, vaccines were pretty much seen as a dead science. They're the kind of things that you got as a baby and that kept you alive, but nobody appreciated it because you got them as a baby and you didn't know they were keeping you alive. I think, again, this is going to be a dialogue on an international and national forum about the importance of what you're doing and how important snake bites are. There does seem to be, it's certainly in my mindset that there's more interest in it, probably not enough though. So, but I think the WHO are definitely looking at it.
It sounds like you need champions.
You do.
You need champions, those who have influence, who have the circles that they're able to get your message across, because otherwise it's a little bit like banging your head against a brick wall, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, Tengku Ain.
I'm Tengku Ain from ophthalmology, and firstly I'd like to thank you. I think no words could thank the role that you and your team played in saving mankind and fellow Malaysians. 2 questions really. The first is, with the benefit of hindsight from your personal experience, would you have done anything different? And if you could, would you mind sharing it? And question number 2 is, in a nutshell, maybe as parting words, parting advice, what would you advise us, Malaysian clinicians, academicians, public sectors, various, in preparing ourselves for the next pandemic around the corner? Thank you.
So in retrospect, more holidays. It was and continues to be a lot of work, and I didn't see a lot of my family that I live with for that full year because I was just working. My husband was staying at home, and whenever they called out for anything, it would be Dad because Mum was never there. So definitely more holidays in 2019. Words of wisdom. I'd probably say continue to be inquisitive, be brave, ask the hard questions, but be kind to each other.
And I would like to echo your plea for more holidays. And that's only partly facetious because, having the time to not think about your job is actually a very important ingredient for creativity. And that's what we want in discovery, the opportunity to be creative.
Agree, although I just wanted a break from the lab, to be honest. Yes.
Yes, do we have any other questions? Perhaps I can go here first. Yes. Go ahead.
I just thank you, Prof. TESS, for your talk. Boosting have been talk of town, I think, last time, but not really now because we have a problem with influenza now. But I just want to ask for your insight on booster doses. Do we really need it? Because I heard last time they even encourage of taking it every year. So if you may share your insight on this. Thank
Sure,
you.
I'll start with adhere to whatever your medical council or your medical board is telling you to do. So that's the disclaimer. I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think that, it's not personal because the evidence is there, older adults and individuals who have significant comorbidities and comortalities, immunosuppressed individuals, their immunity wanes faster than a healthy individual aged 18 to 55 or thereabouts. And there is an argument to be made about getting boosters to kind of get your immune response up a bit. Now, whether those boosters are by low levels of circulating virus or a shot in your arm is kind of a decision for your government to make. So I'll leave it there.
Sensitive ground, yes. Yes, we'll go to the gentleman in the back. Take us away from the politics of the discussion.
Hi, Prof. Tessa, it's me, Farid, again. So I'm intrigued by the GMP facility that you have just now, which is, I think, is quite a pivotal establishment in or expediting the whole process of developing the AZ Oxford vaccine. So maybe you can share with us a bit more on this GMP facility. Is it like meant to just serve the vaccine group, or is it for a certain department or certain faculty? And perhaps maybe that's something that we in UM can emulate, or at least in the faculty, because, for example, here in Faculty of Medicine, we have preclinical departments working on identifying targets and, working on the preclinical parts of the therapies that we develop. And then we have the clinicians, we have the Clinical Investigation Center, which run clinical trials. So if we have something like that in the faculty, then it can really help the translational aspect of whatever the preclinical sites are doing to the clinical sites.
No, I would agree that actually having that GMP facility was and is pivotal for us being able to do our clinical trials rapidly, our phase 1s. No, it's open to all. So you will get preference if you're a University of Oxford researcher simply because they know you and they know the products that are coming through. They don't make every type of vaccine, so they don't use every platform, and that's normal. Most vaccine manufacturers will know how to do one or two things really well, and that's what they'll concentrate on. I'm not too sure about EVs and how far or how hard it would be to make those, but you could certainly try and have a conversation.
So it all circles back to having conversations, having dialogue, having communication. Yeah, but it's perhaps maybe what's needed is for someone to matchmake, for want of a better word, to bring the stakeholders together so that you can have those conversations. Any other questions? Yes, Prof. Yazid.
Good morning. I'm Prof. Yazid, I'm pediatrician. From the immunology point of view, I mean, we were very scared when it hits us.
Yes.
We were alone. Pediatrician has to take care of our own patient. No one come and help us because everybody is afraid to treat children. But from the immunology point of view, why do you think that children is spared as compared to the usual, outbreaks? I mean, all the vaccines are basically for children, right? So that's my first question, and then
go slowly because the jet lag will hit in.
Okay. And the second question is that I'm also wearing the hat of the undergraduate deputy dean. So how can we stir the interest of our students to get into this kind of,
Sure.
Yeah.
Two good questions, and actually I'm surrounded by pediatricians. So my department is pediatricians. I moved from the Department of Medicine to pediatricians, and everybody, I'm not a clinician, but apparently children are not small adults. It's a completely different minefield of medicine. And actually that was one of my biggest worries. I have two, I was going to say young children, but they're not young anymore, but two youngish children when the pandemic hit. Normally, when a pandemic hits, or normally these viruses hit pregnant women, children, and older adults. So I was really worried that me going to the lab every day would bring something home and would impact them. In fact, it was the other way around. My son brought it home from school to me, so not holding any grudges. I think it's really, really hard when you're looking at these types of pandemics about making sure that you're hitting the right cohorts. So your question is, why did it not hit children this time around? So the latest reading, and I could be out of date, is around how the virus gets into your body, the ACE2 receptor and co-receptors. And actually, so the virus binds via the spike protein to these receptors in your respiratory tract and elsewhere, and that's how it gets in. And there's meant to be more of those as you age. So children are not meant to have as much of that in their lower respiratory tract, so they didn't get so poorly. But we were very, very lucky, in my opinion. And then the second question was how to get undergraduates interested. I would actually say it's even younger. It's primary school and secondary school, and you need to keep kids interested in science. Once you've got them in undergraduates, they're in. So hopefully you can pitch to them that all of these different areas are important.
And that's definitely behind our faculty's approach of reaching out to schools, even primary schools and maybe even kindergarten, because we have our open days and we invite them in. And so that's when they first learn about what we can do as doctors. We do actually have some questions from online listeners. So the first one is from Atisham Azam. And I'm not sure if this was already addressed before, but this is regarding gene cloning techniques for producing a common vaccine for all kinds of coronaviruses.
So there's a lot of active research that's ongoing in that field, and there are different ways to do that. So you can try and make a vaccine that will target the spike part, so then the parts of the spike that don't change, to try and get a vaccine. And then there are other ways to try and look and make vaccines with the internal antigen. I've gotten very geeky, so sorry for the general audience. But yeah.
So are we close to having? No.
Okay, but sorry, that was very damning. There are people who are doing, who are making vaccines that I would be hopeful that they would have a good chance at making those, but they're only at phase 1. So it's still a while.
So I know we do have lawyers in the audience, and I was wondering whether you would have, Prof. Jason, perhaps would you have a question regarding either the legal aspects of vaccine discovery or perhaps the ethics of the rollout?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Jason Chua. I'm the Dean of the Law Faculty. I have to say I don't work in the field of medical law or even bioethics or health ethics. My field is on shipping, so it's far removed from the coronavirus. But my professional experience with the coronavirus was over seafarers who caught the COVID-19 virus and were then, of course, barred from accessing various ports and so on, and were denied essentially access to healthcare and et cetera, because of lockdowns and so on. I suppose my question is that on an international level, you've talked a little about the role of the WHO, and I'm quite interested in the role of the WHO in trying to, during the rollout of the different vaccines, I was in the UK and I was working in the local Citizens Advice Bureau, and there were people coming to see us about, well, there are so many different vaccines out there, which one should I go for? And it was quite interesting because they were coming to us because we were open online, whereas some of their GPs were not taking such inquiries, and so we were, of course, in a difficult position to giving any kind of guidance. But when we're looking at so many different vaccines out there, and I think the experience in Malaysia was also very similar, because my father was asking me, oh, there's this, that, and the other. And you were saying earlier about not comparing vaccine efficacy simply by looking at the statistics. But in a sense, that's the only information that a lot of us have access to. So going forward, when again, given the fact that we're only interested in getting the vaccine into people's arms, and so we want to encourage, I suppose, a proliferation of different kinds of effective vaccines, what would be the best policy and regulatory approach when it comes to getting the information out to, if you like, the wider communities? Thank you for that. It was quite a long diatribe. And I'm not suffering from jet lag.
Not at all. So I think it boils down to what is the most effective way to communicate with the general audience around vaccines and how to get vaccines in arm. My parents were asking me the same questions. What vaccine should they take and what vaccine is the best? And my answer did not change. Get the vaccine you're offered, get it in your arm, stay alive. And in fact, both my parents had different vaccines. And we, making the vaccine, weren't allowed. Well, we took a decision not to be part of the trial because we wouldn't be able to work on the results, etc. But that had the knock-on effect that we didn't get a vaccine for quite some time because we weren't seen as priority workers. So that caused an amount of angst. I think there's again, this comes back to communication. And it comes back to, during the pandemic, there was a lot of individuals that would stand forward and would announce what they, with authority, that this is what you should do and this is what you should not do and this is, etc., etc., etc. Science is not like that. Everybody thinks scientists know the answer. There's one answer and it's simple. It's not like that. It keeps moving, it keeps changing. If you don't meet a scientist who can say, I don't know the answer, then they're not worth talking to, in my opinion. If you meet a medic who can always treat you, who always knows what to do, again, I tend to not trust them. There is a level of uncertainty, and I think there's an amount of educating people that science isn't this static thing that you read about in books. It's evolving, it's moving. So when I stand up and I say, this vaccine will keep you alive, and then it changes the next day because of an evolving virus, that's not me lying. It's because the science changes. So I think the biggest lesson that I learned from the pandemic around communicating to the general public is around making sure that you don't come out with definitives, that you're open and you're listening to what they're asking you, and that you try and explain that science constantly changes. It's like sand underneath your feet.
It sounds like there are aspects of culture, and I don't mean this in a kind of geopolitical sense, but just the way that we are and how we relate to each other.
I agree.
That's what has to be overcome, and that's not easy to do. Yeah. Yes, please.
My name is Zulkarnain. I'm a board member of the University of Malaya. I'm an engineer by profession, by qualification, and I used to run the largest pharmaceutical company in Malaysia and being tasked to bring the vaccine to Malaysia, the COVID-19 vaccine. So the experience that I have with the government, regulators, and as well as the manufacturers, various manufacturers that we're being asked to deal with, is most of them are looking for the financial thing first before to bring the vaccine in Malaysia. And we have been discussed with three different technologies. One is kill virus technology. Second is adenovirus technology. The third one is RNA, mRNA technology. And then this technology being bring by different manufacturers and different type of efficacies. And we've been accused to make money out of it because we are pharmaceutical companies. And then the most, I can say, maybe I'm unlucky or lucky, I don't know. But the most difficult task is to negotiate with the manufacturers to bring the vaccine to the country. They, for example, like AstraZeneca, I just have to quote this. That time, AstraZeneca don't have the facilities in Malaysia because they couldn't produce enough in India. I think I met Serum Institute of India, and then we have discussed about it. And then at that time, Serum Institute was not allowed to export the vaccine. So we cannot bring the AstraZeneca vaccine here in Malaysia at that time. Only a few, okay? And then we can't directly discuss with RNA vaccine manufacturer because they don't want to discuss with us. So, and then the only companies and only manufacturers that want to discuss with is Chinese manufacturers, which is either Sinovac and Sinopharm. So my question is, between these three technologies, I don't know which one is more superior or which one is inferior. But all of us here in Malaysia receive these all three technologies. Okay. At that time also, WHO didn't allow on the mixed vaccine policy. All right. But we have been given here, being allowed to use a different vaccine for the third dose. So that's what worried me at that time as manufacturers. So in your opinion, whether RNA or adenovirus or kill virus, which one that we should approach in order to fight any pandemic later on? Whether we have to do it all this type of technology or we just concentrate on the one technology, such as RNA, which is more so-called advanced technology than kill virus technology. That's my first question. Second question is, when it comes to the regulatories, I think I've been dealing a lot with regulators here in Malaysia. And I do not know how the regulators in the UK compared to other countries that went through the process and then going against or reducing the bureaucracy in order to make it the approval on the clinical trial, first phase, second phase, and third phase, as well as to approve the vaccine within the shortest period. Because from 5 to 10 years become within 1 year. So it is a very magical number of years when it comes to the manufacturing of the vaccine. And then I think maybe for those the professors here in the vaccine production or vaccine technology, I would love to share my experience and then also share my contact networks around Southeast Asia to produce and then to get the vaccine antigen to produce the vaccine from different technology. Thank you.
I'm sure we'd like to follow up on that offer, but for today, perhaps we could just boil it down to
Sure.
regulation.
Two quick questions. It was around which one to make all the vaccines going forward, and the second one was regulatory. So the first question is no, I'm not going to. There isn't one. If you were asking me to bet on a platform for the next pandemic, I would say I'm not going to bet. I'm going to continue to invest in all of them. And actually, some of the older tech may be more suitable for the next pandemic because we don't know what's going to come, especially if it's a bacteria or if it's something like plague. So we don't know. And I don't like the de-investment in the older tech because the older tech keeps us alive every day. So I would say don't de-invest and put everything in RNA or adenoviruses. I would say continue to have a broad portfolio. CEPI and other funding bodies are doing a thing called library, and we're doing it as well. It's not that unique, where they're looking to see, they're using different platforms against different viral families and seeing which platform performs the best. You're not going to really know until you've got a big outbreak, but at least you'll have some of the supporting data that will hopefully allow you to make those decisions. Sorry, the second question was about regulators.
Yes, and particularly with regards to research.
Oh, how to shorten it from 10 years to 1 year. I don't know that I would. So regulators did what they should do. It's a regulator's job to scrutinize. It's a regulator's job to make it difficult, to make it hard, to ask those hard questions, because it's their job to keep people safe as well. People were able to do it because they're burnt out, because there are people who worked 24/7. Do I want that to continue to happen so that we have teams that are decimated by the end of a pandemic? No. Do I think we can do it faster than 5 to 10 years? Yes. Do I want to do it every year? No. No.
Here. So we have one last question. I believe Datuk Sohail wants to... Oh, Datuk Zulkifli? Yes.
I'm Dr. Zul from MINDEF, and we've gone through the treatment, but as for us, the health security has come concerned, and through your experiences, going through the various pathogens that might cause the coronavirus, from the very beginning, so our concern, or to kill off the curiosity, whether this pathogen is actually a new strain or new design.
So apologies. Is the question which one I'd be most worried about? Or,
and the other things, whether this is just a new strain or is a designer virus that most of people concern as like a new threat, and the other things that whether a new threat can be more aggressive in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take the which one am I most worried about? It's not Nipah. So which one am I most worried about? Well, it's probably because I work on it so much and I know about it, it'd probably be CCHF. And that's because of global warming and the spread of ticks and the spread of the natural habitat. However, having said that, it's probably really disease X, the one that we don't know, that we haven't got any countermeasures for. Do I worry about increased pathology of these different viruses? Yes. Viruses are, well, they're not alive. Well, that's a debate. But they are very clever and they can evolve and they do evolve. Do I think the newer viruses that we're seeing of SARS-CoV-2, are they worse than what we had at the very beginning? We're in a different place. We have protection through immunity, through vaccines and through transmission. So it's really hard to guess whether these viruses are more pathogenic. They certainly spread faster than the original one.
Well, that was a very interesting and engaging conversation that we've had this morning. The sands of time, however, can move exceedingly fast, and unfortunately, our last grain has fallen. And so with that, I will have to bring this session to a close. I would like, if I may, to summarize the lessons that Prof. Lam has shared with us. And I think it boils down to, number one, develop expertise, develop relationships, communicate, teamwork, and then finally, think ahead to the next generation, because they maybe will be our salvation.
They will.
It is customary in our events or our ceremonies that we end with a Malay pantun or poem. And so, Tuanku, with your permission, I would like to recite one. Buah berangan di rumpun pisang, limau kasturi berdaun muda. Kalau berkenan, samalah berbincang. Tanda diri beradat budaya. And for our overseas guests, it loosely being the operative word, translates as chestnuts in banana groves. Alongside young-leaved must climb trees. Engage in discourse if it behoves. For a civilized culture, it signifies. With that, thank you very much. Ampun, Tuanku.
Thank you, Professor Dr. April, for that great session and for that lovely pantun. Thank you, Professor Dr. TESS LAMBE, for that inspiring and insightful lecture. Thank you for your remarkable work and insights into this most important topic that I know affected all of us here. Well, Prof, that was wonderful. So grateful to have you with us this morning. Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of our event today. Ampun Tuanku, disembah maklumkan bahawa demikianlah sempurnanya majlis syarahan khas pada pagi yang bahagia ini. Patik sekali lagi merafak sembah menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih di atas limpah perkenan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku bercemar duli berangkat ke majlis pada hari ini. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Mengumumkan keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan diiringi div-div kehormat. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I, Dr. Norazlina Mohammed, the MC on behalf of the organizer. Once again, we would like to thank all of you for your kind presence. We hope to see you again at our future event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Refreshments will be served at the wing A of the foyer. Thank you.